This is the moment the world, and particularly the Iranian people, have been told to expect for decades. The breaking news from Israeli Channel 12 that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been killed in a joint US-Israeli airstrike is not just a military update, it is a potential earthquake whose tectonic plates have been shifting beneath our feet for years. If confirmed, this would be the single most significant development in the Middle East since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. It marks a departure from previous strategic calculations, where the head of the octopus was often deliberately spared to avoid the very chaos we are now facing. The immediate reaction from figures like former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett frames this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the Iranian people. But an opportunity for what? A swift transition to democracy, or a bloody power vacuum filled by even more radical factions? The death of the supreme leader is not the end of a story, it is the opening of a Pandora's box. Before you absorb the punditry and the political spin, take a moment to sit with the gravity of the what if. What if the man who has controlled the levers of power for 37 years is actually gone? Let that question settle, because the answers will dictate the headlines for the rest of the decade. For the millions of Iranians who have flooded the streets in recent years, chanting "Women, Life, Freedom" and "Death to the Dictator," this news is likely met with a complex cocktail of euphoria and terror. The regime Khamenei built was not just a government, it was a comprehensive system of theological and political control.
Just weeks ago, in January 2026, that system responded to nationwide protests with breathtaking brutality. Human rights groups estimated that over 5,000 protesters were killed in a crackdown that exposed the regime's desperation. The regime saw its own people as the primary threat. Now, with the linchpin removed, does the system collapse? The opportunity is undeniable. As President Trump reportedly urged, once we finish our attack, take control of your government. But the path to taking control is fraught with peril. The Iranian state is not just one man, it is an intricate web of power dominated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. Here is the critical question for the Iranian people. Who do you fear more today, the IRGC or the chaos of the unknown? The IRGC, whose top commanders were also reportedly killed in these strikes, is not just a military force, it is an economic empire and a security apparatus with 150,000 troops. For decades, their primary mission has been the preservation of the regime. If that regime is decapitated, the IRGC must make a choice: fracture, fight to retain power by installing a successor, or turn on the population to prevent a democratic uprising. Critics within Iran, like strategist Saeed Hajarian, have long warned that the system is rigid and has lost the ability to predict and prevent waves of protest. If the supreme leader is dead, does that rigidity turn into paralysis, or does it trigger a desperate, violent lashing out? To understand what happens next, we must look at the theology and the machinery of succession. Interestingly, Ayatollah Khamenei himself appeared to be preparing for this moment. In 2025, reports emerged that he had named 3 successors, pointedly excluding his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, in an apparent move to reject dynastic succession. But that move was made when the regime was under pressure but intact. In a crisis, the rules change.
Some analysts have argued that leaving Khamenei alive was actually a strategic choice by Israel. The reasoning was that killing him would martyrize him, sanctifying his son Mojtaba and unifying the regime behind his successor in a religious frenzy. Now that the martyrdom scenario is potentially here, we have to ask, can Mojtaba Khamenei, who lacks the senior religious credentials to be a supreme leader, unite the hardliners? If he cannot, we may see a schism. The regime could split between the IRGC hardliners, who want to fight to the death, and pragmatic clerics who might seek a deal to save the system. But there is a darker possibility. The IRGC could simply dispense with the clerics altogether. If the theological cover is gone, Iran could transform from a religious autocracy into a military junta overnight. For the protesters on the street, fighting a general with a gun is a very different prospect than fighting a cleric with a narrative. The death of the supreme leader does not just affect Iran, It pulls the rug out from under the entire axis of resistance, the network of proxies including Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, the Houthis in Yemen, and Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. These groups derive a significant portion of their legitimacy from the concept of wilayat al-faqih, guardianship of the Islamic jurist, obedience to the supreme leader. If that leader is dead and the succession is contested, the axis becomes a collection of freelance actors. For Israel, this is the ultimate strategic gamble. While the death of Khamenei eliminates the master planner of the octopus, it also removes a centralized command structure. Will the tentacles of the octopus continue to flail independently, or do they go limp?
Hamas, already devastated by the recent war in Gaza, could find itself even more isolated if its Iranian paymasters are preoccupied with a civil war at home. On the other hand, Hezbollah, which possesses a massive arsenal in Lebanon, might act autonomously to avenge the martyr Khamenei, dragging Israel into a two-front war regardless of Tehran's internal chaos. Think like a diplomat in Riyadh or Abu Dhabi right now. For decades, Gulf states have navigated a path between the US and Iran. They fear the regime, but they also fear the collapse of the regime. As noted by analysts, the Arab states' worst nightmare is large-scale chaos and civil war inside Iran, with spillover effects. If Iran breaks apart, refugee flows, disrupted shipping lanes, and the empowerment of ethnic separatist groups could destabilize the entire Gulf. For the Trump administration, this strike represents a massive escalation. The stated goal was to eliminate the imminent threat and to push for zero nuclear enrichment. By killing the supreme leader, the US has moved from containment to active regime decapitation. But the question Washington must ask itself is, what is the exit strategy? If the regime collapses, the US and Israel will be credited or blamed for its destruction. The responsibility for what comes next, humanitarian aid, preventing nuclear material from falling into the wrong hands, managing ethnic conflict, could fall squarely on American shoulders in an election year.
The West must also contend with the economic shockwaves. Iran has repeatedly threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz if attacked. If the regime feels it has nothing more to lose, it could attempt to choke off 20% of the world's oil supply. For the West, already dealing with inflation and energy insecurity, a spike in oil prices triggered by a collapsing Iran could be politically devastating. Do not just watch the explosions, watch the oil futures and the US stock market. The first indication of how dangerous this new world is will not come from a politician's speech, but from the price at the pump. There is a grim historical lesson that applies here. The removal of a long-standing authoritarian leader, whether Saddam Hussein in Iraq or Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, rarely leads directly to the flower of democracy. More often, it leads to a power vacuum filled by sectarian violence, warlordism, or even more repressive faction fighting to prove its strength. The Iranian regime is ideologically driven. Unlike a secular dictatorship, the Islamic Republic has a messianic dimension. The crackdowns on protests in January 2026, which killed thousands, showed a regime willing to destroy its own population to survive. That survival instinct does not die just because the leader dies. It may mutate. The ultimate question for the audience is this: is the death of Ayatollah Khamenei the death of the Islamic Republic, or is it the painful birth pangs of something more dangerous?
If the Iranian people can seize the moment, and if the IRGC fractures rather than consolidates, we could see the emergence of a pro-Western democratic Iran. That would be a geopolitical revolution, potentially making Iran an ally of Israel and a stabilizing force in the region. But if the regime holds, if Mojtaba is crowned as a martyr's son, or if the IRGC turns Tehran into a war zone, then the instability will make the current situation look stable by comparison. For now, the news is unconfirmed but seismic. The death of the Ayatollah closes a 47-year chapter of history. The question no one can answer yet, but everyone must ask is, what writes the next page? The Iranian people or the IRGC's guns?